Today, I'm going to begin the chapter on nervous system. Okay, so nervous system is the last part of your entire like NP1 syllabus. It's a huge chapter, not one, multiple chapters together. Okay, so we are going to divide them in multiple portions. So for example, I'll tell you exactly overall what you are looking at. So overall, it has the first part consider the neuron structure and their classifications and some of the other detail, the cell. Then the next part consider the neuron physiology, means how a neuron cell will work. Then we're going to talk about neurotransmitters, so that's another portion. And then following classes, we are going to learn about brain in detail, cranial nerves in detail, spinal cord and reflexes in detail. So I'm going to create multiple video lectures in this case. Okay, so today, in this particular video, I'm going to focus only the first part. Okay, so let me get the PowerPoint slide, and then we can start talking the first part of the nervous system. Okay, so as I said, that it's a vast chapter to understand the beginning, like how we're going to talk about the entire nervous system. So let's first focus on a simple example. Okay, so before we even proceed, I want to mention two things which we started the class with, like ANP1, that there are two regulatory systems. One is called endocrine system. The other one is called nervous system. That was our day one of our ANP1. So endocrine system, that's a regulatory system which you're going to study in NP2. And nervous system is also another regulatory system, meaning it regulates other systems, other organ of the other systems. So what nervous system does basically, let me give an example first. Okay, so let's think about that. Let's say something, right, imagine right here is a table, and if I put my hand on the table and the table is extremely hot, so what will happen next? So imagine this, I put my hand on the table, and then obviously I'm going to do this, like I'm going to move my hand because that table is extremely hot. Okay, by the way, hot does not mean that you always move. Depending on what is your holding. For example, when you hold a coffee cup, then you hold it tightly so that you don't want to drop it. So your body knows those things, okay? So if it is a very hot table, you hold it and then you move your, you touch it and then you move your hand. So now if you break down this activity, so let's break it down, okay? So point number one, you touched it. So when you touched it, your receptors here, they are going to touch that, they are going to come into contact with that heat. And then they send the signal to your body. And then you move. So there are three things happening here. So first is sensing, your body is sensing some changes. So that's right here, sensing some changes, whatever that change may be. Then the second step is your body is interpreting their changes. Not only they decide, they also remember it. So once you touch the phlegm, definitely you touch sometime in your lifetime, maybe in the childhood, you don't want to touch an open phlegm because you know that's not going to be a good sensation in your body overall. So you first detect the sense, and then second, you interpret, like your body will decide, like, hey, we should move or we should not move based on it. So I'm giving another example. Let's say a hot tub, jacuzzi. So initially when you put your foot down, they're like burning sensation. But do you run? No, because from our previous first day probably you ran, like kids, that's why they ran all the time. But when their first time that your brain already recorded the message, you know what? The pleasure is coming up. So let's be there in that hot tub for another 10 minutes. So that's called interpretation. So your body decide exactly what they're going to do with that changes. And then accordingly they react. So third point is reacting to that changes. So accordingly they react. In my first example, if this is a table hot, and if you touch, because it is hot, you touch and move your hand. The reason is body react because otherwise they know they're going to have damage on the part of the body. That's nervous system. That is actually like truly nervous system. So if you understand this, what exactly I just said, you understand, believe it or not, like 50% of the chapter. The rest 50% you have to learn different cell, how the cell works, different word, this and that. This is the understanding part. So one more time. So how your nervous system works? 3 steps process. We can break down the step later on in detail more, but 3-step process. Sensory. So this senses the changes, whatever that change is. Then there is a determining area like control center, like they decide what to do. And then finally, you react accordingly. Those 3 things together, that's your nervous system. Okay, so even in this picture, look at that. Your finger is sensing. In my example, your finger, when you're touching that. Then your brain and spinal cord, which I'm going to mention later on in detail, they are actually thinking, and then your muscle helping them to move. So that's the 3-step process. So let's understand this whole thing one more time, a little bit more in detail. So as you can see in this particular slide, they're talking about like chapter 14 here, chapter 13 here, chapter 16 here, chapter 15 here, chapter 17. So you can understand this slide is actually covered in multiple different chapters. Okay, so we have to understand this particular one. Then you'll have a grip on exactly what you are looking at, like what you're expecting to have in the entire nervous system chapter. So first, if we even proceed a little bit, nervous system we divide into 2 parts. Nervous system we divide into 2 parts. The one is called peripheral nervous system, PNS, peripheral nervous system. The other one is called central nervous system, CNS. So we refer to that as a PNS and CNS in letter. Okay, so when you talk about CNS, we actually mean central nervous system, and PNS stands for peripheral nervous system. So what is that? So CNS, central nervous system, consists of 2 things, brain and spinal cord. So right here, brain and the spinal cord. So in this particular picture, they put a little bit gray color. So that's the brain and the spinal cord. All the nerve right there belong to CNS, central nervous system. They are the main information processing center. Remember, we discussed that. First, you sense the change, then you do the information processing, and then you react. So this is the place where you process all your information. So we can say that CNS is the control center of the system. And where is PNS? PNS is anywhere else in your body. It could be also in the face. Brain and face is different. So it could be right here also. So the nerve right here is also PNS. Nerve right here is also PNS. So any nerve that is around anywhere in your body except these 2 places, brain and spinal cord, they belong to PNS. So what PNS does, they mainly do 2 things. They bring the information and they execute the job. So they bring in the information, they execute. So if you think really, it's not very difficult. So your brain and spinal cord, that CNS, they're deciding what to do. Okay, PNS, they are doing the job. So they're either bringing in the information and let CNS decide. And depending on what they decide, PNS carry out that information and body react accordingly. Okay, so let's go a little bit more detail. So in the PNS, this part which we call receptors, meaning whenever you are, let's say, as I gave an example, I'm touching the hot plate, or I'm touching the hot plate. Yeah, that's the best example. I'm touching the hot plate, or I am smelling something, or I'm looking at something. So all these are receptors. There are receptors in the body. They does all the work. There are receptors in the body that does all this work. So I'm going to talk about receptors a little bit later, a little bit more detail. So let's assume right now that you got that information. So when you touch a hot plate, your heat sensing receptors in your epidermis here, or in your skin, they got the message that this plate is very hot. Now what they do, look at the slide again. So they bring in the information. They're bringing in the information to the CNS. So let's say right here, you get that reception, like that's hot, and then you bring the information right into the CNS. So you're bringing in the nerve, very important. The nerve that brings in the information is called sensory division, or afferent. Afferent means going, means going in, toward. So afferent. So sensory division or afferent division, they're going into the CNS. So they're bringing in the information into the CNS. Now CNS, they decide what to do. I explained to you already that hot does not mean you always move, depending on many factors, and depending particularly on the memory or previous incidents. Brain will recollect that instantaneously and then decide, hey, this is hard, let's move. So when they decide, so information is taken care of here, control is getting the information processed, and they know exactly what to do. What to do, that information is coming out back to the PNS again. This part of the nervous system, that division of the nervous system, we call motor commands, or motor division, MOTOR, motor division, motor commands. Okay, or also known as efferent division. F means exit. Okay, so when they are going AFF means going in, EFF means exit. So one is going in the information, one is coming out the information. So the motor division comes out. Now, as our body has different part, so motor division generally has two branches. They have two branches. One we call somatic nervous system, or SNS. The other one is called autonomic nervous system. Soma means body. Autonomic, auto means self. Nomic means, actually the word nomic came from law, like self-governance. Okay, autonomic nervous system, self-governance. Okay, they do their own. And this one you can control it, like your conscious control. This one you have no conscious control. Okay, again, motor division is divided into two branches, one called SNH, somatic nervous system branch. The other one is called autonomic nervous system branch. Somatic nervous system, don't forget this, they control directly the skeletal muscle. So skeletal muscle, we learned previous lesson in detail that how it works. And remember, we learned a junction called neuromuscular junction, or NMJ. So the motor neuron, now it's, you're reinforcing that what you learned. The motor neuron coming from CNS that comes to the skeletal muscle, where they control the NMJ, neuromuscular junction. That's exactly this branch. They control your skeletal muscle only, not cardiac, not smooth, skeletal muscle. Autonomic nervous system, on the other hand, they also have two branches. They call parasympathetic and sympathetic division. Parasympathetic and sympathetic division, normally, I have a slide later on, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. Normally, the sympathetic division tends to control the arousing factor of the body, like fight or flight conditions of the body. And parasympathetic normally like calm you down. So when they're controlling, let's say, for example, heart, how fast your heart should pump the blood, parasympathetic reduces the heart rate. So they're calming you down. Sympathetic will increase the heart rate. Okay, but again, this is not always the case. I'll give you another example. later on in digestive system you're going to learn. So sympathetic division inhibits digestion, and parasympathetic, they stimulate digestion. So in other words, I always give this example to understand. So when you're driving a car, normally automatic transmission cars, they have two pedals underneath. So you have one foot on the gas, one on the brake. Just imagine that. So if you want to move your vehicle, you press the gas. If you want to stop the vehicle, you press the brake. It's like kind of like opposite function. One is moving the vehicle, one is reducing the speed, meaning stopping the vehicle. Exactly like this. So parasympathetic, they are most cases, they want to stop the vehicle, so they want to calm you down, and sympathetic, most cases, they want to make it better. So the opposite way they control smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and all the glands of the body. This, whatever getting controlled, the whole group is known as effector, meaning they're the one that doing the job, they're executing the job. So remember one more time, a hot table, I'm touching it and I'm moving my hand. So moving hand, that's I'm executing the job, is done by the muscle here. So if you touch here, this is the receptors, they take the signal, the nerve that goes into the CNS, central nervous system, they decide what to do, and then in this case they decided to move, they send another motor neuron, in this case somatic nervous system, that comes to my muscle right here, the bicep muscle contract, hand moves. That's exactly what we learned. And this is how your nervous system works, okay? So how we are going to proceed in this particular chapter. In this particular chapter, we are going to focus on the cell that doing these jobs. So those cells are called neuron or nerve cell. So we are going to go into their detail later on. Right, let's go back here. Let's talk about the receptors a little bit, okay? I do not have additional slides for it, but the review sheet that I gave you guys, like and uploaded in the system, they should have a section about the receptors. So let's hear me out here. So the receptors are divided into two groups. I'm not going to follow this. I'm going to say something else. So receptors is divided into two groups. One group is called general receptors. The other group is called special receptors. So one group is general receptors. The other group is called special receptor. General, they can be anywhere in the body. Special, they are in a particular location. So for example, the receptors for your vision is right here in your eye. So if you close your eyes, you cannot use any other part of the body to see. So for vision, your receptors are only at the eye, that location. So that's a special receptors. Same thing with the ear, the sound. The receptor for getting the sound, like sensing the sound, is in your inner ear, and that's only the special receptors. So your vision, and then your ear, which is basically the sound, then taste. So that's only on the tongue. The taste receptor, receptors for tasting the food. You cannot taste the food anywhere else, any other part of the body. Smell, that's olfactory receptors only in your nose. You can smell something only from the nose, because you cannot smell anything or any food using any other part of your body. Unless your olfactory nerves are stimulated, you can smell them. And finally, your balance, your equilibrium. The balance is inner ear. They have some receptors. Okay, inner ear, they have some receptors for the balance, and that's why when you're let's say you want to bend your body, you do not want to bend as much so that you can fall down, because your receptors, they're controlling your balance. So there are 5 special receptors. One for vision, that's right in the eye. Sound, that's for the inner ear. And then taste, that's that's in your tongue. The smell, that's in your nose. And balance or equilibrium, that's in your inner ear again. So those 5 are the special receptors. At the end of nervous system, we are going to obviously, particularly in the lab, we're going to go detail into the eye and the ear. Okay. For the general receptors are like, your touch receptors, your pain receptors, your temperature receptors, your pressure receptors. All these receptors are called general receptors. So they're everywhere. They're everywhere. They are not uniformly distributed. So they are not 100% equal distance on the receptors. They are called like their distribution called punctate distribution. Punctate means they have a cluster. They have a clustered way of distributing, but they're everywhere in the body. That's why they're referred to as the general receptors. Good. So these are the two different. One is the special receptors. One is the general receptors. So we know the basic. Now general receptors, we also classify them, not the special, general. General receptors, we classify them based on where the stimulation coming from. Where the stimulation coming from. So general receptors, we are classifying them based on where the stimulation is coming from. If the stimulation comes from outside, we call them exteroceptor. So follow the word here. You can either call them exteroreceptors or you can call them exteroceptor, like the word together. Again, this word you can easily find in the review sheet that I uploaded. Okay. So the stimulus is external. So for example, I touch the hot table or a hot plate. So the stimulation comes from outside. So these receptors will be categorized as exteroceptor. Now let's say you have a stomachache, you have a toothache. So the pain is coming from inside your body. So the receptors, they're associated with that, we call them interoceptor. Intero means inside, or some book will call it visceral. The word visceral means inside, so visceroceptor or visceral receptors. Now, there is a third variety. The third variety scientists created is they're also inside your body, but they're only associated with like skeletal joints and muscles right there at the joint. Okay, so all the information that you're getting from the joint, they put in a special group. Apparently no reason, but they just put in a special group that's called proprioceptor. Proprioceptors. So they are dealing with anything around your joints, okay? The skeletal muscle and the joints. So that are group called proprioceptors. So you have three type of general receptor, or three class of general receptor based on where the stimulation is coming from. Extero means the stimulation is outside, external to the body. Intero or visceral, the stimulation is inside, stimulation coming from inside your body. And third variety is called proprioceptor. Okay, they are all associated with skeletal muscle and the joint. So these receptors that I just discussed, you are going to study. So listen to this lecture video a couple of times and then write down the note, and then you can study from the book as well as the note that I uploaded. It has no slide specifically. Okay. So now let's go back to our original discussion. So we are going to go to the neuron cell. We're going to go to the neuron cell. So let's review one more time that what we learned. So central nervous system is CNS, that consists of brain and spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system, PNS, that consists of the nerve that are going outside to the body, and then they are either bringing signal from the body to the CNS or they're taking the signal outside. We call them cranial and spinal nerve based on where they produced or where they're exiting from. So if they're exiting from brain, we call them cranial nerves. If they're exiting or entering from spinal cord, we call them spinal nerve. Okay, detail of cranial nerves and spinal nerve we're going to learn in a different chapters. And then what is the job of the PNS? They're basically connecting the CNS to all the glands, muscle, and all other organ in your body. Okay. Somatic nervous system, remember the motor division has two branches, somatic and autonomic. So somatic, they're talking to the skeletal muscle directly, so they're controlling the skeletal muscle only. So they are voluntary. And autonomic, they are involuntary. Autonomic, auto means self, nom means law, remember. The autonomic means involuntary. They control the smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. And they have two branches, parasympathetic and sympathetic. Normally, the sympathetic tends to go with the fight or flight syndrome. Basically, they speed up everything. They arouse the body. And parasympathetic, they calm the body down. But again, as I mentioned, in the case of digestion, it's not always that the case. That's a tendency to do that. So this is neuron. So far that we discussed is basically the basis of the nervous system, the fundamentals of the nervous system. Now we are going to talk about two groups of cells. One group is called neuron or nerve cell. The other groups of cell we call supporting cells or glial cells or neuroglia. These are the two groups of cells together make the nervous system. Again, so this is one group that's called neurons or nerve cell. The other group is supporting cells. So now follow the word, supporting cells. So what they do? They support the function of the neuron. So we are going to talk about those support a little bit later on, okay? So let's focus right now on the basic cell that creates all the function that we just discussed. That's called neuron or nerve cell. That is why sometimes it is considered as the functional unit of nervous system. Functional unit of nervous system. So neuron, they can be various types. They look different type, but normally when we study like this kind of neuron we study from first. So this is a good place to start with. Although again, neurons look-wise, they can be multiple different types. So this is a typical neuron cell that we can talk about in detail anatomy a little bit later. But before that, let's talk about two things here. All these neuron, like all the neuron cells, they have three simple properties. What are those two properties? Those three properties are right here: excitability, conductivity, and secretion. So neuron cell, these are the three things they always do. They have the property of getting excited. Meaning, remember I said that they carry the signal? So how they carry the signal? Because the stimulation excites them. So they change, a lot of biochemical changes happen in the neuron cell. And then they carry the signal, that conductivity. So they carry that electrical impulse or signal from one place to another. So they take in a remote location or far away distance. And once they reach at the end, they secrete neurotransmitters, that secretion. So excitability, conductivity, secretion, these are the three properties of a nerve cell, of a neuron cell. Now let's look at how a neuron cell look like. Okay, this portion I'm just going to use the next picture to describe all these things. So as I said earlier, the neuron cell look different. We're going to talk about that later. According to the structure, they can be classified multiple ways, but this is a typical neuron look. So in this area where the nucleus is and the cytoplasm around the nucleus, this is known as soma or cell body. So cell body of a neuron, important word, cell body, I wrote down right here on the side. Cell body of a neuron is referred to as this area where the nucleus is, because they have a lot of extension. A lot of extension are right here, and then one extension can go really far, far away. These extended part right here, these are called dendrites, and this one is called axon. So the dendrite and axon, these are the two very useful terminology. So dendrite, what they are? They receive the information. So the cell, when they're receiving it, so let's say this is a neuron cell, these are the dendrites. The dendrite, the word came from like a tree branches, how it looks like, particularly in the winter time. We are familiar because we live in New York area. So we know the tree loses all their leaves. Those empty branches, those are dendrites. So this is how they look like, the dendrites. And axon, we can consider this one. That's like a one huge long process. Okay. Now, remember this first. A neuron cell, they can have only one axon or sometimes they don't have an axon. So one more time. So a neuron cell, they can have one axon or no axon at all. But they can have like one dendron or multiple dendrites. They can have 1,000 dendrites. Okay. So these are called dendrites. Which one? The process that this receive the signal. So if you follow this particular slide, they'll say conduct impulse. Impulse is the signal towards the cell body. Towards the cell body. So if you follow this arrow right here, the signal is going towards the cell body. Remember, this is the cell body where the nucleus and the nucleolus is. That's the cell body. So the signal is going towards the cell body. So that's dendrites. And what is axon? The signal is going away from the cell body. This is the arrow. Follow the arrow, like right here. The signal is going away from the cell body. So this is axon. Axon is conduct signals or impulses away from the cell body. Away from the cell body. So axon can generate and transmit the signal. Axon can generate and transmit the signal. And dendrites, they receive the signal. That's the easiest way to remember. Dendrites are the one, they receive the signal, and axon is the one that generate and transmit the signal. So how they generate and how they transmit detail, we are going to learn in neural physiology part. So later on. Right now, we are going to just focus on the anatomy part. So let's go back one more time right here. So this is nucleus with the huge nucleolus at the center. This is the soma or the cytoplasm of the neural cell. These are dendrites. And this is axon. Where the axon is coming, so this area, actually these where the process are going out, these are called pole, like North Pole, South Pole, the poles. So these are poles. Right here, when this particular poles is a little bit thicker, wider, like if you imagine this, like when your fingers are coming out, these are all poles. So this is like dendrite, but right here, where the axon is coming out, this is a little bit wider. This is where the axon originates. This is known as axon hillock. The word is axon hillock. Hillock means exit, like a door. So this is axon hillock. So right here where the axon originates. Normally, as I said, a neuron cell has one axon or no axon. So let's say they have one axon. Normally, they don't branch. But sometimes they produce some lateral branches. We call them axon collateral. So these are rare. But sometimes they do make one branch. We call those branches axon collateral. But whether they make branches or not, at the end of axon, they divide into multiple tiny branches. We call like arborization. Arbor means tree. So they make like this branching. So at the end of the axon, they do like this. We call them axon terminal. So we call them axon terminal or terminal arborization. Axon terminal at the end of the terminal. But what happened at the end of the terminal? At the end of the terminal, let's say, so they make this terminal. At the end of the terminal, the structure becomes like a bulb. So if you pay attention right here at the end, it's become like a bulb. We call those bulbs synaptic knobs. Synaptic bulb, synaptic knobs. Synapse means junction. So syn means together, apse means to join. Like they are going to join with some other cell at that point. It could be another neural cell, or it could be another muscle cell, or it could be a gland cell, whatever they are going. So this is the end, they join like that. So one more time, this portion is called cell body, where the nucleus is with a huge nucleolus. And these are dendrites, definition-wise, where they receive the signal. This is axon. Definition-wise, axon can generate and transmit the signal. There is normally one axon, which originates from the area called axon hillock, but they can make rare, although some branches, we call them axon collateral. At the end of axon, when they carry the signal, this arrow is signal transmission. At the end of axon, they make a lot of branches. We call them telodendria. That's another fancy word, telodendria or axon terminal. Telodendria or axon terminal, okay? Or terminal arborization. names. And then at the end of each terminal, we have a bulb-like structure. We call them synaptic bulb. So let's go to another slide just to teach you a little bit more about synaptic bulb. This is a synaptic bulb. So right here, this is one of the axon terminals. And at the end, this bulb-like structure is called synaptic knob. This bulb-like structure is called synaptic knob. In that bulb-like structure, in that synaptic knob, we have a lot of vesicles. These are all the vesicles. These are vesicles, container vesicles. What they have? They have chemicals, we call them neurotransmitters. So these are basically, look at this, synaptic vesicles containing neurotransmitters. So follow even the word, that will give you the answer. Neurotransmitters, what they do, they transmit the neural signal. So imagine the signal comes right here from the cell body all the way down here. So they can go to the remote location. So signal can start here and can go all the way to here. And right here in the remote location, when the signal arrives, they do exocytosis. Exocytosis, so those vesicles popped out and the neurotransmitters are released. Those neurotransmitters, in most cases, they travel a microscopic gap and then get attached to the receptors that is present on the other cells. That other cell could be another neuron, or could be a muscle cell, could be a gland cell. So in neuromuscular junction, the previous chapter, you have this cell is a skeletal muscle cell. In this example, they are showing this is a neuron and this is another neuron. So we can call them, this one is presynaptic neuron. Presynaptic means before the synapse. And so this is the word presynaptic neuron. And in this case, the other one is called postsynaptic neuron. So presynaptic neuron sent the signal, postsynaptic neuron accept the signal. So presynaptic sent the signal, postsynaptic accept the signal. Okay, so the receptors are on the postsynaptic cells which receive the neurotransmitters, and once they receive, something happens. That means signal transform from here to here. That we are going to learn in neural physiology chapter. So let's go back one more time to the original neuron slide. So cell body, axon, axon terminal, and the synaptic knob. So what else we should know about? A couple of extra things right here. If you look at the structure, like whether this microscopic structure or here, these dark regions on a neuron cell right here, so many, these dark regions, those are called Nissl bodies. Nissl bodies, that's the word, Nissl bodies. Nissl is the name of a German scientist, Franz Nissl, who discovered obviously this structure first. They are very, like they're a little bit dark region on the neuron cell so that you can easily identify neuron cell in a mixture of cells. So if you have a mixture of cells, then you can find out just by looking at the Nissl body, which one. But what are those dark bodies? What are those dark bodies? Those dark bodies are nothing but, now we have electron microscope, now we learn more. They're nothing but like chromatophilic substance, like a dark region. What are they? They consist of rough endoplasmic reticulum and free ribosome for protein synthesis. So they're made with lots of rough endoplasmic, they're compartmentalized with lots of rough the rough endoplasmic reticulum and a lot of ribosomes together. So, but now in the cell chapter, we already learned that ribosome and the reticulum, endoplasmic reticulum rough, they together responsible for protein synthesis. So we can say now that Nissl bodies is responsible for maintaining metabolic activity of the neuron cell, because Nissl bodies are nothing but those rough ER and free ribosomes. So we can say that they are the one that controlling the metabolic activity of a neuron cell. Okay, so I intentionally wrote down all those words. Most of the word I already explained to you, and the remaining word I'm going to explain to you next. So make sure you know all those things, okay, all those things, because you're learning, again, the anatomy of the neuron cell. The next part is basically, before we go to the next part, like all these cells I want to mention two things. One, just follow the axons. Ignore these blue color cells outside the axon. The axon is that yellow tube right there. So what happened is we just learned from right here that neurotransmitters are released from the synaptic nerve. But the neurotransmitters and many other protein here, they are made in the soma, in the cell body. So basically, what axon, this is axon, so what axo, and the cytoplasm of the axon we sometimes call axoplasm. So what axoplasm does, they built the protein or the neurotransmitters or any other protein that required in this area, in the soma, in the cell body, and then they bring them here. And once the function is over, they can, even these neurotransmitters is coming out, they can reabsorb them and use them for recycling. And for the recycling purpose, they take them back to the soma. In other words, the axoplasm, the cytoplasm of the axon, have to have a way to carry material from the cell body to the axon terminal and from the axon terminal back to the cell body. This is known as axoplasmic transport. I'm going to skip some slide. I'm going to come back to that later on. So this is called axoplasmic transport or simply axonal transport. So axonal transport is basically you have to take the materials, that whether it is neurotransmitters or recyclable materials or the repair protein, all these materials, they make it in the soma. So they have to take the new one to the synaptic nerve and use them, and then they can reabsorb or recycle, or damaged one, they can return it to the soma. So these two transport, they run by a lot of molecular machines, I can call them, or like, it is just like, imagine this, UPS and FedEx. So UPS is taking the material from your home to your office, and from FedEx taking the material from your office to home, just an example. Okay, so those are the two protein. One is called kinesin, one is called dynein. So kinesin, like in my example, kinesin is, let's say, UPS, dynein is like the FedEx. Okay, just two different molecular truck or molecular motor which spend ATP and does the job. Then literally, later on in graduate level, you can learn those cytoskeleton can, inside the axon structure, can act as a monorail system. And then this protein can be transported by these two, they carry on their back, literally. Okay. So kinesin is doing this, anterograde, and dynein doing the retrograde. So these are the terminology that you have to memorize in this case. The anterograde, what is anterograde? Anterograde is movement from the cell body to the axon terminal. So the cell body to the terminal, where the synaptic nerve is, that is anterograde movement. And retrograde, opposite one. They take the material that needs to be recycled and need to be fixed, they take it back to the cell body, that's retrograde movement. So anterograde, kinesin, retrograde, dynein. The whole phenomena we call axonal transport or axoplasmic transport. Okay, so that's another one additional thing. And now, before we learn the myelin sheath, like what is myelin sheath, I have to teach you something else first. So I'm going to talk about supporting cells of the nervous system first, and then come back and learn what is myelin sheath. Okay, so I'm going to skip this. I'm going to come right here. Okay, so neuroglial cell or the supporting cell. Remember in the beginning, I said there are two types of cell, neurons, which we know what they are, and supporting cells. Supporting cells means they support the function of the neuron, also known as glial cell or neuroglial cell. Glia, the word means glue. So they, in other words, they're putting the whole system together. They're holding the whole system together. Okay. In the CNS, there are 4 types of supporting cell. In the PNS, there are 2 types of supporting cells. In the CNS, those 4 types are astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, microglia, and ependymal cells. In the PNS, Schwann cell and satellite cells. Okay. Now, let me give an example first, like how we can think about this. Like, say, for example, any city, okay, any city, like, let's say, New York City. So New York City, the government, the office that runs the New York City is the City Hall, Mayor's office. But can Mayor's office does the job alone? The answer is no. They need the help from Department of Education. Okay, they need the help Department of Sanitation. They need the help from NYPD. They need the help from FDNY. Those are supporting cells. Exactly like this. Like literally, when you study a little bit detail, astrocytes, they're kind of like NYPD. Oligodendrocytes, they're like kind of like FDNY. Microglia, they're literally like Department of Sanitation. And ependymal cells, they deliver nutrition, so I can say Department of Nutrition. Okay. Similarly, shown and satellite cell in the PNS. So what you need to know first, you need to know the names, obviously. So 4 cell types in CNS, they are astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, microglia, and ependymal cells. Then 2 cell types in the PNS, Schwann and satellite cells. And you need to know their functions. Okay, so at this point, right here, you have to open the book and read the functions at least 1 or 2 times, then go through my slides and the note and memorize them. This is the part that you got to know exactly like what they do. Okay, so for example, astrocytes. So astrocytes, what they did, the name came from because they look like a star shape, astro and star shaped cells. Okay, they are one of they have actually most works. Okay. Out of these 4 supporting cells in the CNS, this is the one that does most of the job. So one of the most important job is to create a blood-brain barrier. So the blood capillary that goes to your brain, they're supplying the brain tissue, but the astrocytes, they wrap around, like they have connections on the blood capillary, so they can talk to each other. And they can allow some material to go in, and they don't allow some material to go out. So they're like, as I said, they're like a police department. They're guarding the city. So if you imagine your brain is the city, these are the NYPD. So same thing here, like astrocyte, they're guarding this. So that's what's called from a blood-brain barrier. They also recycle and metabolize neurotransmitters that being transferred from one cell to another. So they help in the process. They provide structural support of the CNS, in this case, brain tissue, and they regulate potassium balance as well. Apart from that, they have multiple other function as well. So when you read the book, make sure, but focus on these functions for memorization purposes. Oligodendrocyte, they're like an octopus. Okay, they can have like 10, 15 arms. They're like an octopus. Okay, so what they do, they create the myelin sheath. Although I'm going to explain the word myelin sheath, the detail later on, they create the covering on the axon of the CNS. So CNS, in the CNS, they have nerve, so they do have axon. Those axons are covered but they're like, I'll give an example to understand. You know, the electrical tape. So when you you're connecting one to another, 2 things, and with an electrical wire, and you want to make it safe, so you take the electrical tape and wrap around that. So to protect the electrical tape, not only just imagine, not only they're protecting the security, but also they're helping the transmission better. That's exactly what they do in the CNS. And the same thing, the same job is in the PNS, peripheral nervous system, done by Schwann cells, the another supporting cells. Okay. Microglia, they are, as I said earlier, they're Department of Sanitation. So they have a phagocytic role, meaning they go around, they check all the CNS all the time, and whenever they see something damaged or something dead cells, they will eat them. They will do like phagocytosize them. Like, you know, remember phagocytosis means like eating. So they're literally going to eat them. So they comes from the cells called monocytes. So they keep protecting or clearing the debris all the time. Ependymal cells. Ependymal cells, we're going to learn detail in the brain chapter, that they produce a nutritional fluid for all the nerve cells. that fluid is called a cerebrospinal fluid. The reason it's called cerebrospinal fluid because this is the same fluid is in the brain and in the spinal cord as well. So ependymal cells, they looks like sometimes like a little bit cuboidal cells in the epithelial tissue. They looks like that. So they do produce a nutritional value towards the cell in the nervous systems in the CNS. Satellite and Schwann cell, these two are the supporting cell of the PNS. Schwann cells, we already know, they do the myelin sheath, like the covering of the, like the electrical tape around the electric wire, around the axon, they do in the, and satellite cells, what they do, they also provide electrical insulation, but that's only around the soma, near the cell body. That's one job. And then the second job is they maintain like the environment of the PNS neurons, so that the gaseous and the nutritional environment of the PNS neurons. So that's one of the biggest job. And Schwann cells, they wrap around the axon to create a myelin sheath. That's a covering, that's a cover, myelin sheath. So now so we know now all 6 cells, 4 in the CNS, 2 in the PNS. Make sure you know their name and their functions, characteristics in detail. Okay, now let's talk about the last part when we're talking about the anatomy is the myelin sheath. So what is a myelin sheath? Basically, myelin sheath is, let's go back right here. Let's look right here. So see that yellow tube right inside that yellowish, that is the axon. The blue cell on top of that, this is the PNS picture. Right here, this is PNS. So those are Schwann cells. Again, in the CNS, the same job can be done by oligodendrocyte. Okay, so Schwann cell, what they're doing, they're wrapping around that, that axon. So literally, you take an axon. So let's say this is an axon. And just imagine this is an electrical wire. Take an electrical, those black electrical tape. So you go around that tape, could be as many as like 100 times. So you create that whole outside layer. That's myelin sheath. How they created it, this is how they create. So if you look at one single, this is the axon. This is the axon. So Schwann cell, they're starting to wrap around. So they're starting to wrap around. They're wrapping around. They're wrapping around. They're wrapping. So now Schwann cell is a cell. So this is their plasma membrane. And we know plasma membrane is made with like mostly lipid. So they have like 20% protein, 80% lipid. So this is all the lipid comes together, creating like an insulation, like a rubber padding on top of the axons. Okay, imagine this. Imagine you have a toothpaste, almost end, like at the end of the month. Let's say you have toothpaste. There's a little toothpaste remaining in the tube, but you have the almost empty toothpaste tube. And if you take a pencil at the end, and if you just flatten out the toothpaste tube on the bottom, and now if you wrap around that toothpaste tube over and over to the pencil, all the toothpaste, that the remaining toothpaste, will kind of bulge at the end, like they're going to push something outside. That's exactly how they look like. So this pushing outside part is the nucleus. That nucleus has nothing to do with the neuron cell. That nucleus is the supporting cell nucleus. In this case, Schwann cell nucleus. That is a Schwann cell nucleus. So when you see all the nucleus right here, all these nucleus, these one nucleus, two like nuclei, all these, those are nothing to do with the nerve cell. Nerve cell nucleus is right here. Those are Schwann cell nucleus. So this nucleus is the Schwann cell nucleus. Okay, now two more terminology. Excuse me. Two terminology. One is if you see the membrane of the axon. So this is the axon. So that yellow one, the membrane of the axon. The membrane of the axon, that's called axolemma. Cytoplasm of the axon, axoplasm. We learned that word before. So axolemma, lemma means membrane. The axolemma is the membrane of the axon. Now all the way outside, which is the Schwann cells, the plasma membrane, that's known as a neurolemma. So neurolemma is the outermost layer right here of the Schwann cells. So if you look at this particular picture, right here, this is axolemma. And this outer layer, that's the neurolemma. On top of the neurolemma, this is the outer layer, that's the word, neurolemma. On top of the neurolemma, there is something called endoneurium. The exactly same way in the muscle chapter that we learned that the muscle fiber, each muscle fiber, innermost layer is called endomysium. Then they make a bundle, we call them perimysium. And then they make a bundle outside that, we call them epimysium. Same thing here. Each neuron, right after that Schwann cell neurolemma, they have a delicate layer. This delicate layer is called endoneurium. Then later on in the spinal cord chapter, when I'm going to detail on the spinal nerve, we're going to show you endoneurium, then perineurium, and epineurium. That's how they make a bundle of neuron cell. We call that nerve. So right now here, we don't need that much detail. We just need to know this is axon. The membrane of the axon is called axolemma. This is myelin sheath, that the multiple, like, you can go as many as 100 times. So the Schwann cells, which are wrapped around, created that myelin sheath or the covering on top of the axon. This is the nucleus for the Schwann cell, and the outer layer is called neurolemma. Now, obviously, one Schwann cell cannot or one oligodendrocyte, same thing, one Schwann cell or one oligodendrocyte in CNS, they can cover that long axon. Axon is very long. So if you go back one more time, see this axon is from here to all the way here, let's say. So we need more than one Schwann cell, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in this case, for example. So many Schwann cells. So between two Schwann cells, the gap they produce, that gap is called a node of Ranvier. Okay, Ranvier is a French word, French name of a scientist, so who initially explained them. So node of Ranvier is basically the gap or indentation between two Schwann cells. So the gap or indentation between two Schwann cells we call node of Ranvier. And now this area, like as much area as Schwann cell is covering, like one Schwann cell cover, that is called internode. So for example, here to here, that's internode. Here to here, that's internode, and so on. And then one additional word, the first one from the axon hillock all the way to the first Schwann cell, this first one we call initial segment. The reason we name them, we need to know this part because that is where the maximum signal generates. And then they originate near the axon hillock area, and then they transmit to the axon. Okay, so myelin sheath is the outer layer created by Schwann cell in the PNS, oligodendrocyte in the CNS. Okay, so that's constitute most of the anatomical part that you guys need to know. And then finally, we need to know the classification of neuron. So neuron can be classified with two ways. Neuron can be classified two ways. One is called functional classification of neuron. The other one is called structural classification of neuron. So the functional classification of neurons is according to the function. So they are, you already know these things. Remember, we touch the heart plate, again, the same example, you touch the heart plate. The one that is bringing in the information, those neurons are called sensory neuron or afferent neuron, they're going in. The cell is neuron. The bundle of cells, like the tissue, is nerve. So pay attention to the word cell. When you're talking about a cell, we call them neuron. When you're talking about a bundle of cells, like many cells together, we call them nerve. So later on, when we mention the classification of nerve, it's a little different than classification of neuron. So pay attention to the word. Right now, we're talking about the cell. So classification of neuron according to the function, going in sensory neuron and going out motor neuron, the one that comes out and then activate your muscle, that motor neuron or efferent neuron. The one that is thinking in the CNS, in the brain and in the spinal cord, those are called interneurons. They actually outnumber both of them. They're like 90% neuron of the body. So interneuron or association neurons are the one that is in the CNS. So they connect, the function from the sensory to the motor. So according to the function, neurons are three types. So they are sensory neurons or afferent neuron, motor neuron or efferent neuron, and inter or association neuron. Those are the three types of neuron according to the function. According to the structure, we have four types of neuron. We call them unipolar, bipolar, multipolar, and anaxonic. So unipolar, bipolar, multipolar, anaxonic. Now first, let's talk about anaxonic first. Anaxonic, no axon. I mentioned earlier that neuron can have one axon or no axon. These no axon neurons are normally consist of all the dendrites. They are normally in the brain. Okay, they are in the CNS, so they help to the connections between multiple neurons. Okay, there are a ton of them, but they don't have an axon. Okay. The other three, unipolar, bipolar, multipolar. So first, listen to the name. Unipolar, one pole. Bipolar, two poles. Multipolar, more than two poles. So remember poles, I gave you example, poles where the dendrite and axon coming out, those are poles, like a north pole, south pole, poles. So now if you have a neuron like this, you have only one pole comes out, unipolar. If you have a neuron like this, so one pole here, bipolar. And if you have a neuron like this, we have multipolar, multiple poles, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, total 6 poles right here. Okay, so one more time, unipolar, because only one coming out, bipolar, multipolar, same thing. Now look at the picture. One pole came out right here. Then they can make branches. One side can go to think about axon, the other one dendrite, that's fine. So this is one pole. So that's a cell body. They have one pole, unipolar. These unipolar neurons, remember this you are going to need it later on also. These are sensory neurons. These unipolar neurons are the sensory neuron. They bring the information from PNS to the CNS. It should be an arrowhead, like arrowhead. So PNS to CNS. So when you're bringing the information from PNS to CNS, unipolar neuron. Multipolar neuron, obviously, multiple poles. Could be 3, 4, 5, to hundreds poles. So those multipolar neurons are normally motor neuron. The multipolar neurons are the motor neurons. So they bring the information from the CNS to PNS. So put an arrowhead here. So CNS to PNS, that's multipolar neuron. Bipolar neuron, they are rare. They found in the eye and inner ear and the smelling organ like here, olfactory. They are a little bit rare. They have one pole here, one pole here. Like one pole here, one pole here. Bipolar. Okay, so bipolar neuron means two poles. And here unipolar neuron, one pole, and multipolar neuron. Okay, now unipolar neuron, they are sensory neuron. They're bringing in information from the PNS to the CNS. Multipolar neuron, they are motor neuron. They're taking the information out from the CNS to the PNS. Anaxonic neuron, before anaxonic, bipolar neuron, they are in the retina and the inner ear on the olfactory. As I said, they're rare, but they have two poles. And finally, anaxonic, there is no axon. Okay, so this you have now the basic of nervous system, like how it works, and then you have receptors. We talked about receptors, so make sure you know all about receptors. Then we talked about the anatomy of a neuron. Neuron is a cell. Nerve is a bunch of cells. So neuron, we talked about the anatomy. I give you the whole lesson on every single word. Make sure you know, like going back right here, cell body, distal body, axon, dendrite, axon collateral, axon hillock, telodendria, or axon terminal, synaptic knob, myelin sheath, node of NPA, neurolemma, axolemma. Then we talked about myelin sheath formation in the CNS and the PNS, and we talked about exoplasmic transport, like how molecules go from soma to the terminal and then terminal to the soma. And then we talked about classification of the neurons and functional classification, structural classification. And at the end, we talked about all the supporting cells. So 4 supporting cells in the CNS, 2 supporting cells in the PNS. finally, there are two words. We are going to need it later on. I'm going to mention right here. One is called white matter. The other one is called gray matter. So white matter and gray matter in general, white matter they appear as white. Gray matter, they appear as gray. So when you look at the spinal cord, this is inside of the spinal cord, they appear gray. We call them gray matter. Outside, it's appear white. We call them white matter. You look at the brain, inside we have a lot of white matter, but outside appears gray, we call gray matter. Gray matters are the cell body in the CNS. So in the CNS, when you see a gray matter, these are the mainly cell body area, where the cell body, the dendrites, they are located. That area is called gray matter. In the PNS, in the peripheral nervous system, not in the brain and spinal cord, right here in the PNS, the ganglia is the word. So ganglion is the singular word, ganglia is the plural word. So cell body in the PNS, we call them ganglion. Cell body in the CNS, we call them gray matter. Cell body in the PNS, we call them ganglion, plural is ganglia. Cell body in the CNS, we call them gray matter. And apart from that, white matters are the myelinated process. So they appear as white in color. So in the tract, the nerve tract is moving, like a bunch of axons moving together, and they are all myelinated. They appear as white. We call them white matter. We are going to need these two terminology later on when you learn detail. So up to here is basically you have, again, one more time, you have the fundamentals, the basis of the nervous system. Then you have the neuron anatomy in detail, and then you have neuron classification. Then you have all the supporting cells. This table can explain all the functions of the supporting cells in one place, probably helpful. Okay, so finally, so in this lecture, you basically are going to cover the basis of nervous system, then receptors, then neuron anatomy and neuron classifications, then synapse, like how the junction works, and then supporting cells in detail. Okay, all right.